I went through two incredibly harrowing things. We bought our apartment and we adopted a child, and it just really struck me how those are very like middle class goals, and they were the hardest things we've ever gone through in our entire lives. That's overstating it, but they were just like incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I mean, it sounds like a terrible idea for a play, but normally like that's like when I say like, oh, let's write a play about alone, that probably means I should think about it, and give it more oxygen. And so I started writing this play, and it's set in this cubicle, and I thought, okay, well, what if the constraints of the play are very untheatrical, that it's like two guys in a cubicle and they don't stand up for the entire, really not until the last 5 minutes of the play. And so I started writing, and I got about 30, 40, 50 pages in or something like that. And then the idea for the title came because I was like, well, like this is essentially a play that for the first 30 pages, it's two guys in a cubicle talking about a loan. And it's a small loan, and the stakes are very low. So like if the title it's set in Twin Falls, so say if I just titled it like Twin Falls, I think like an audience would show up and it's called Twin Falls. They sit down and it's two guys in a cubicle talking about a loan for 30 minutes. And I think it's a different play than if you walk in and there's this almost like absurdly grand title.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, I guess this play must be set in the Vatican or something. And it's like a theological argument or a debate or something.
Sure.
And it's these two guys talking about a loan. And I think that kind of automatically puts an audience on the hunt of just sort of like, what is this play doing? You know what I mean? Like maybe slight annoyance too, which is like interesting. But yeah, it became, the thing I didn't expect is that it became like a weirdly provocative title too. Mm-hmm. Like it actually made people angry, which I thought was really interesting, and continue to think
people
really
coming into the theater or people leaving it going. I made the
kind
mistake. I made the mistake of reading comments on the Jesse Green's review.
Oh yeah.
And the first one. First one, a woman wrote, "I found the end manipulative and phony. I do not feel it made the case for the existence of God." And when you have a title like that, it's like, you don't leave with an apologetics, right? Like a case for. In fact, I think one thing that we're maybe getting ahead of things, but the characters do talk about. I reread the play today, and Ryan a couple of times talks about how he has faith that things will work out, and then not long after he says, I just want things to make sense. Things should make sense, and that's gesturing in that direction, right? And then I won't give away the ending, but the ending sort of looks at maybe a larger scope of time and makes you feel like both insignificance, but also the sort of cosmic.
There's a continuance.
Yeah, the continuance of something. But I feel like one easy way to read it would be, their relationship is a proof of God to each other. The bleak way to read it is like, if this is the best, there obviously is no, because it's just these two guys and a mortgage, and they're gonna die, and it's meaningless, right? You know what I mean? I mean, can it be read? I don't think you intended it that way, but
no. I think the God in this play is kind of. I mean, I thought about this a lot. I mean, it's like unless you're a sociopath, you believe in something. You know what I mean? Right. Like be it human relationships, your family, even your work. Like everybody has their own value system, and other than the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world or whatever, like people are trying to negotiate that value system and like figure out meaning in their own lives. And I think that's what the play is essentially about: is these two guys who are at this like. I mean, for those of you who don't know the play, I don't think this is giving anything away, but they're both dads to young kids, and their fatherhood is being threatened in both cases. In both cases, in very different ways. And both of them are in this kind of existential crisis over that. But it's through their connection. I mean, it's also just fundamentally a play about male friendship.
Yes.
And like platonic male love, which is something I feel like I don't see a lot. I remember I did a reading of this during the pandemic. I did like a Zoom read of it with some friends, and one of the person on the Zoom was Ebony Booth.
Okay.
And Ebony said afterwards, she was like, I kept expecting them to either fight or fuck, and neither ever came. And that remains to be like one of my favorite reactions to the play.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing the play made me think of was, that meme about Men will do anything to avoid therapy.
Mhm.
They'll like invent Facebook. They'll learn about the Roman Empire. They'll bury themselves with terracotta soldiers. There's all this whole meme. And again, I read in the play this does work like therapy for them in a way.
Yeah.
The way that they finally are able to talk to each other. We were talking earlier, and we've talked over the years, and some of your plays are explicitly about people of faith and religious background. Could you tell us a little bit about what your background is, and then where you stand with that now?
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's complicated. I grew up in a small town in Idaho, and my parents are not fundamentalist Christians, but I went to a fundamentalist Christian high school for 4 and change years.
Yeah.
When I was like outed and had to leave, and it was very complicated and messy. And so I think like my relationship with faith was like, I actually really liked it when I first entered into like 7th grade, because it was so organizational.
Yeah.
And it meant that like, I mean, it's like the guys in the play, like things don't make sense. You know what I mean? Like, like that church offered like a system of belief that was so concrete, and they had all the answers, and and it wasn't until when everything happened that I realized like, oh, this kind of belief system like exists at the cost of people like me.
Right.
And that was like a hard thing to learn at 17.
Yeah.
But I think like I've had this conversation with a lot of people that once that like faith switch gets flipped, it's really hard to just turn it off,
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, this sounds cheesy, but like, theater has become my church. I can't believe I just said that, but you know what I mean? Like
identify.
But like it is become like the place where I try to make meaning out of meaninglessness,
Right.
like these two guys are doing in the play. So yeah, I don't know. It's still kind of, I wrote about religion frequently. I mean, and the irony is this play is one of my only plays that has no religion in it at all.
Right, exactly.
So,
but it's got God in the title.
Yeah.
I think another thing we talked about was, again, this idea that, I mean, it is a Christian belief that we sort of represent Christ to each other. We're God to each other, right? And I think you made the joke that it's like the anti-Sartre, that hell is other people, but the play is basically as God as other people. Whatever the meaning of life is other people, right? And the other thing that I hit upon when I was reading it was I felt like, does the word parable would that be too grand a word for what this would be? Like it's a
I don't know.
No.
I actually I had never thought of that. I mean, maybe. What do you think?
I mean, I think in the context that we know, the particular sort of like just so story, the way a parable is told, it's not quite that, but I feel like in the sense of an analogy, in the sense that it's it's not coming at it directly, right? It's coming at the questions of meaning and faith and the cosmos indirectly. Right?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
It might be. I mean, it might have been like a parable that I wrote for myself too, because I mean, I started writing the play before the adoption of my daughter was finalized, and so it felt very.
Oh wow.
I remember I got like halfway through the play and I had to stop.
Yeah.
And then finally, after we finalized after a year and a half, then I could allow myself to finish it. But like, so.
How old is your daughter now?
She's 7. She's
just
turned 7.
Okay. I mean, if you read the play or haven't read the play, it's Keith, the character who's fostering to adopt a child and has been through a couple hits and misses with that, misfires. It's touch and go throughout the play. His relationship with
and I should say, like, the play is not autobiographical directly.
No,
so
exactly. But I can imagine
in case
writing.
my daughter's watching this in 10 years.
No, it's not. But I mean, obviously, if you're writing that while it's still uncertain for you as well, right?
Yeah.
That's still going on. It would be hard to do. It's funny you just said the word harrowing again, and that's one of the things that I wondered about the way class works in your plays, because this is something that also comes up a lot in the plays. In this case, Keith is very educated and uses a couple words that Ryan doesn't know, and I just wondered about. I mean, it adds some humor, I guess, but it also illuminates this. And there's some reversals in the way that they're seen throughout the play.
Yeah.
I wonder if you talk about the way. Do you think about that consciously when you're writing about like where they stand in the position?
I don't know if it's conscious. I will say that like I moved to New York when I was freshly 18, and I had never really I don't want to say I was unaware of class, but I just didn't really know how money operated, especially in a place like New York City.
Okay.
And and all of a sudden I was like surrounded by a lot of kids who like grew up in a certain way that like I was like I do not understand. You know what I mean? It was like a vocabulary that I just didn't have.
Right.
You know, and then I would go to the theater and I would be like, why are all these people rich for no reason? You know what I mean? Like they're just living in brownstones, like.
You mean on stage as well?
On stage, that's what I mean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just started to be like, I don't understand why money doesn't exist in these fictive worlds.
Right. They
You know
don't
what I
talk
mean?
about
Whereas
it.
like
It's
in
just-
the real world, that's like
yeah.
most of what we're concerned about on
Yeah.
a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that just sort of like unconsciously or maybe consciously led me to, you know, I mean, there's a different play of mine called Clarkston, and there's this like really key moment where there's this like young kid from Eastern Washington and this kind of privileged kid from the East Coast, and the privileged kid, they work at a Costco together, and the privileged kid is just deliberately shattered a $5,000 television in an act of like kind of brattiness, and there's this whole monologue the other kid has. He's sort of like, I don't think you understand what $5,000 is.
Yeah.
You know, like what $5,000 means to me, that's what I could put toward my college loans after 18 months of working full time. You know what I mean? Yeah, sorry, I'm rambling now.
Yeah, no, I get it. So, you said that when you came to New York, you became newly aware of it, but then you go back to Idaho and you see it in new ways since you've had that experience.
It's funny,
Yeah.
like my husband a few years ago started a playwrights residency in Sun Valley.
Yeah.
Which is not the part of Idaho I grew up in. It's like a resort town.
Yeah,
And it's
okay.
so weird now. I was just there 2 weeks ago. It's so weird for me to go to Sun Valley because it is so different from the Idaho of my youth. You know,
Right.
it's just, you know, and even my dad is always like, that's not Idaho. Like Sun Valley.
That's not real Idaho.
You know?
Right.
And I get it. I mean, it's just, there's so much money there.
Yeah.
You know? It just feels very, very different. Feels
The
very
other thing that I see you alluded to those two characters in Clarkston. One difference between Ryan and Keith in this play is that Ryan, of course, is pretty down on his luck financially, but he's also the kind of person that I know folks from my hometown the same way, who it wouldn't even occur to them to leave the state or to just drive.
Yeah.
They had the dialogue where they're trying to figure out what is just north of Idaho in Canada. Like, well, there's a lake. There's really nothing to do there. But he's never been out of the state, let alone out of the country. I mean, that's just another way that. Let me ask you. You've talked about. You write about most of your plays. Not all of them, but most are set in Idaho. Is that right?
Well, other than the one I just referenced, Clarkston, but it's literally across.
Right. Yeah.
border.
That's technically,
Right across the border.
the technicality. But your husband made this wonderful map that was up a signature
Yeah.
that showed where all the places are, and these are all real places. These aren't made up towns or slightly fictionalized towns.
Greater Clemens is a made-up town.
Oh, it is.
That's
okay.
the only one, yeah, because that's a play about a town that votes to unincorporate itself, and so
Oh,
it
okay. Right.
kind of
Right.
had
That's
to-
fictional.
That's fictional, but it's based off of Wallace, Idaho.
Okay. And you had said before also that so Greater Clemens was, and I really felt this about your work. All your work had built to that in a way. It was this sort of a climax, and it was maximal for you. It was at Lincoln Center.
Yeah,
How big was the cast? Like
7, which is
seven.
huge for me.
For you, yeah. But it was also a big set,
Oh yeah,
big, and it was long. It was like I remember it being O'Neill.
3 hours.
Yeah, it was O'Neill
Yeah, yeah.
but it felt like it earned it. But that was one of the impulses to go back to a two-hander. Was that right?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really good time, you know, working on that play, but it was just like yeah, it was maximalist for me. It was just like so big,
Yeah.
so long, and I just kind of felt like, and it also like it coincidentally happened like right before COVID, and so I had been thinking about Case for the Existence of God in the months leading up to Greater Clemens at Lincoln Center, and after that happened, I was just sort of like, I want to write a play that you can perform with complete integrity in your living room if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
Because there was just something about Greater Clemens that, like, you know, it's a 2-level set, and I remember like at some point somebody saying that the set alone for Greater Clemens cost like $350,000, and I was just like, you know what I mean? Like I was just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I think I want to go back to something a little bit more essential, and that's really like, you know, like my play that's a signature in the winter is also, it's a 2-hander. It's very pared down.
Right.
Most of it happens either over Zoom or a phone call.
Right.
So it's in this kind of like liminal blank space. and I'm working on a play right now that's also like very, very spare.
And that's a creative impulse. I mean, obviously, people. So you're on the list of top 10 most produced plays for the coming season. There's also King James, Rajiv Joseph's play, which is the two-hander. Lloyd Suh's Heart Sellers is another two-hander on that.
Oh, it
so
is?
yeah, that's also on there. Obviously, folks look at that and go, "Oh, so that's cheaper to produce, right?" And it is. And you just alluded to the practicality. Of course, during the pandemic, we didn't know if we were going to be back in theaters at all. So writing plays that you could perform in your living room was actually not even an economic; it was just sort of a spiritual
necessity.
Yeah, a necessity. I wondered, Greater Clemens was also really, as I start to say this, I realize it was also really tragic, right?
Mm-hmm.
This play is no less tragic in its own way. So it's not like you were trying to run away from that to do a lighter play necessarily.
Well, in some ways, maybe. I mean, like Greater Clemens was the first time that I was, because I think if my plays have anything in common, it's sort of like it's the end is usually people just barely holding on to each other. You know what I mean? And Greater Clemens was an experience of like, what if I wrote a play where like they reach out and they just like miss by millimeters. And I think that's really the only time that I've allowed, well, maybe a couple other plays. I wrote this play called A Great Wilderness. It's not as tragic, but kind of is about that near miss. But this was really like me going for it, and also just kind of playing with the notion of a 3-act American tragedy. Do you know what I mean?
Greater Clemens was.
Yeah. Because I think the first 2 acts are very much structured along, like the first act has a big question hanging in the air leading us to the second act, and at the end of the second act there's this big bang that leads us into the third act. But then the third act kind of subverts its own structure, and it's like it's the longest act, which is like not traditionally the third act is supposed to be the shortest, and it also just like goes in directions that are very different. There's a character that enters for the last 3 minutes of the play that hadn't been in the entire play. I mean, I think it subverts itself in a certain way.
Yeah, no, that's part of what made it a great experience. It was one of the last plays we published in our print magazine before we went on hiatus. And now American Theater's back in print again, publishing plays in the magazine. Is that there's a book of that coming at some point, probably? Or?
I think TCG. I think they announced something.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're doing a publication of Greater Clemens and Lewis and Clarkson in a single volume.
Well, that's a big volume then.
Yeah, they're my 2 longest plays.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Those plays with the place titles.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess would it be the reverse thing when you do a place title like Pocatello or Lewis and Clarkson, then you have to fill it up. We walk in just with just the headline is just the name of the town, and now you're going to tell us all about. As opposed to this play, as you said, it seems mundane.
Yeah.
What we're watching, but there's this grandiose title we have to somehow get to.
Yeah.
Right.
But hopefully the play reaches for at the end. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it does. I am intrigued about. I was telling Sam that I'd forgotten the ending. How moving the ending is. No spoilers, but the ending's very moving. But also, it's very funny, and I think we talk a lot about the seriousness of his plays and the empathy that it shows the characters. But they're also very funny. I wondered what is the writing process for you in terms of this plays heavy on dialogue. There's obviously not just dialogue in a play. There's structure and other things. But tell me about the writing the dialogue. Do you have a background as a performer yourself? Do you act out the parts? Do you get up and speak them around the room?
I don't think.
You don't. Okay. No.
I would hate to admit to that. I mean, I did like acting in high school, right? Like after I left the Christian Fundamental School and I enrolled in the public school where I eventually graduated from, we really only had school plays if we did them. Do you know what I mean? So
okay.
So I was like, okay, I'm doing Our Town and I'm playing the stage manager.
Okay.
I joke with David Cromer that he stole my idea. But I was like only an actor in the sense that like I was tall and I could talk loud, and so I got cast. You know what I mean? Because it's Moscow, Idaho.
Sure.
But it did kind of. I don't know. Weirdly, I don't think I actually came to playwriting through acting. I really came through it through just like when I was a teenager, I was writing poetry, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. And it was really, I would listen to all these old recordings of poets reading their own stuff, and I would do poetry readings and stuff.
Okay, so
like
there's
a little coffee shop in my hometown, and so words in time and space became something I was really interested in.
Interesting.
But dialogue. I mean, I think the reason I love writing plays is that plays, at least the kinds of plays that I like writing, they don't strive for beautiful sentences.
Okay.
And if anything, there's just like a real messiness
Mhm.
to the language that I really am attracted to.
Yeah.
Like one of the key lines in Case for the Existence of God is, I think we share a specific kind of sadness.
Yes.
Which is like a really awkward sentence, and a weird idea. But I love the space that offers.
Yeah.
Where there's no kind of like I always feel like plays don't really have an authorial voice, or at least the kinds of plays I love. Like often when I see a play and I feel like the author shows up and starts talking to me, I just kind of power down a little bit.
Right.
But I don't know. Going back to your original question, like I usually don't write dialogue. That's kind of like the last part.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like, sometimes I'll just do exercises for myself, but I kind of feel like I need to know what a play is before I can actually start make people talk. And usually that means knowing what the end is.
So it's not okay. So it's about structure and sort of what happens, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't outline, but I do usually. I never start a play until I know what the end is. And then it's almost like you're just like driving a car to a destination, but you're not sure exactly how you're going to get there.
Yeah, because it's not, you don't get the August Wilson thing that he talked about, where he would just hear, they were like almost people would talk to him. He had to, what do you have to say? And there's this mystical thing where characters would talk, and he would just have to hear he would have to get their words down, right?
Yeah.
Or once he'd created, other playwrights I know, they will create a character, and then the character tells them, they say, the character tells them what to do. You don't have that. You're more in control than that, right?
I feel like, yeah, I'm not as woo-woo.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like it's work. I mean, it's work.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
there's a Chuck Close quote that I live by, which is inspirations for amateurs.
Okay.
And what I really take that to mean is sort of like, you can't just wait around waiting for the fucking muse to do something. You know what I mean? Like, it really is just about like getting in there, doing the work.
Yeah.
And there'll be happy accidents, and maybe that's what inspiration is.
Yeah.
But
no,
like,
I don't think the writers I talked to, we were sitting around waiting, but they would talk about the way certain characters entered plays was just like they just came in one day, and it was like, what? Who are you? Like that kind of thing.
I mean, that can happen.
Yeah.
But it's usually like, oh wait, what if this person? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's that like that moment of like, oh, I didn't actually. Maybe there is another. Like, I mean, it's in that metaphor that I was saying about like, I know the destination, but I don't know how I'm going to get there.
Okay.
And so sometimes if you allow yourself to just be a little loose, sometimes you just surprise yourself.
Yeah.
When you're writing, and it's why I don't outline, because I think that element of surprise is really important. So maybe that's my version of that.
Right. Okay. So you don't necessarily act out the lines. You don't necessarily hear them in that way, although you do hear the plays, right? Obviously, you hear it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't hear it. I don't know if I hear it or just kind of
see it.
I don't. That's the thing. I don't see it. I'm actually really not visually oriented at all, and it's why I think I should never direct one of my plays.
Okay.
At least I'd be really scared of doing that, because I think I just wouldn't know how to kind of direct traffic.
Albee always would say he could see it all in front of him. He knew exactly where everything was going to happen.
Well, and he was a real kind of
the control freak, right? I mean, you could only certain people could direct him.
I mean, he also claimed he didn't do rewrites, which was a lie. But
it's not, But I mean, there's just different ways people approach that. So you have more control over that. So I guess the question is then, how do you find the voices of characters if you don't say them or don't see? You know what I mean? Like what is the substance of what you're writing? If you've got this car you're driving, and the thing you're driving through is language, is what they're saying, and also though what they're not saying, right? Which, I mean, this is just playwright nuts and bolts, but like, do you write an understory of what they're not saying, or you just know you're sculpting this thing? There's this iceberg underneath.
Yeah, I think it's like, maybe that's what I was saying, is sort of like dialogue is the last thing, because you have to figure out what the iceberg underneath is.
Yeah,
sort
okay.
of like, like the two guys in Case, it's like I had to figure out, I couldn't just be like, okay, two dads, go. I had to be like, no, like one of them comes from a very different background, very different family. This is his history. This is where he's living. And just figuring out both of those guys, and then I think like you start with like crass socioeconomic stuff,
right?
But then that leads you into backstory and sort of like, how people are a product of both their upbringing and their circumstances. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
And then it becomes intuitive, I think, out of
And
that.
then you need to decide what's happening in this scene. This is going to be revealed. Like this is the scene where
Yeah.
this guy talks about, he gets the call, right? He gets the call in the middle of the scene. Okay.
But again, I think it's also about being a little loose with it. Like when I was writing the play, I remember thinking, okay, they're in the cubicle the entire time, literally in the cubicle the entire time. But then I got like 40 pages in, and I was like, what if it becomes non-linear or non-literal a little bit? And so like the cubicle kind of slowly becomes one of their houses, and then it slowly becomes, you know what I mean? It becomes that was something that I had to kind of feel my way into.
Right.
Right.
Much was made of the fact that the two actors in the world premiere at the Signature had been roommates before and knew each other, had this sort of intimacy, Will Brill and Kyle Beltran. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I know other folks did some readings earlier on, but to what extent, you don't write for actors necessarily, but to what extent working with actors informs the writing?
I've done both. I just premiered a play at Steppenwolf
that's right.
that
Of
I
course you
wrote
did, yeah.
specifically for Laurie Metcalf,
That's
which was like an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I kind of wrote a Bright New Boise for this actor Andrew Garman.
Okay.
But yeah, mostly you don't. But I mean, there was just something like, I don't know if a lot of the text changed, but like I remember when Will Brill first read it, and it was such a revelation, and you're like, and they just like illuminate parts of the character that you didn't totally know were there, you know what I mean? And sometimes that results in changes to the text.
Okay.
But sometimes you just let the actor just really like. I mean, it's why I love writing plays, because it's like it doesn't end with me. It's really like I'm just the beginning, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like, and then I get to stand on the shoulders of these other great artists.
And do you feel like actors could show you things about the characters that you didn't know?
Oh yeah.
You didn't even intend necessarily, or I mean.
Yeah, and sometimes you're like, that's not right, and sometimes you're like, you found something that's amazing, you know.
Right.
And sometimes a director can do that too. I mean, I'll give you a concrete example. Like I was working on this this play that I wrote for Laurie Metcalf out at Steppenwolf, and there's this monologue. This is kind of a spoiler, but okay. There's this monologue where it's revealed that like Laurie's character had this terminal cancer diagnosis that she hasn't admitted to anybody, and she's a very like tightly wound, kind of stern woman, and her nephew, who's the other main character, is sort of like has known because he found some paperwork in the kitchen, and finally he's like, I know, like just tell me, and I wrote her this really long monologue in which she's just very methodically going through what type of cancer it is, how big it is, what round of chemo I'm on, blah, 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 you know what I mean? And Joe Mantello, the director, had this idea, like, what if you're vacuuming while you do that monologue? Like, so, like, instead of, like, I had written something about, like, I gave her some line, like, all right, fine, I'll tell you everything. Like, take a seat, you know what I mean? And he was like, what if instead of doing that, she just goes and gets a vacuum? And then while detailing her cancer diagnosis, she's just vacuuming. And it was amazing. I mean, it was just, it didn't, other than cutting that line, it didn't change the text.
It didn't change, okay.
But it was just such a brilliant move.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it just like.
It's in the script now, obviously.
It's in the script now.
I mean, I from my experience, I think Lucas worked with her a bunch of times, Lucas Nath, and she was the kind of playwright who would often, actor who wanted to take lines out, right? You know, I mean, not necessarily in that case, obviously, but she liked to do more with less. At least from what I've heard.
Yeah, I would say that that's true. Yeah, I mean, Laurie is like, she's one of the greatest actors period I've ever worked with. I mean, and she's kind of just like an acting machine. I mean, she just like, and she's just so hungry to work. She just wants to work. You know, like whether it be on a sitcom on ABC or at an ADC theater in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
you know?
that's
like
what
she just
I
desperately wants to work.
Yeah.
And she's also just like, she's the least precious actor that you can imagine. Like there is not an ounce of method in her. Bless her soul.
Okay.
There is no method involved.
Right.
And so really, it's just about like, I mean, like some of the really fun things that I'd do in rehearsal would be like, I would like give Laurie new lines in secret to try to make the room laugh. And she loved it, you know what I mean? Because she just like just loves rehearsing. She loves working, you know. Especially like when the play's working, you know. She just is on cloud nine.
You've written a number. Was it Edmund one of the actors you worked with a lot? Edmund
Yeah.
Donovan. I don't know.
Well, I guess only twice, but yeah, yeah.
I guess that's one I've seen you work with a couple times at
Yeah.
least. Yeah. I noticed another thing when I was reading this time. Both of the men in this play have moments where they try to reach out to the other. This is part of what the masculinity thing you're talking about. And they explicitly say, "Don't pity me. I don't want your pity."
Yeah.
And it feels like one of the dialogues about your work and other work about that deals with class, that deals with the other America, the flyover country that we don't see portrayed, the ones that are not in the Brownstone plays that you're talking about, is this idea of empathy. And I don't. There's obviously a difference between empathy and pity.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a hard line for you, if that's a part of what those moments are about. It's also just these two guys not wanting to, they're rejecting help.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I guess I would ask. Sometimes your plays are held up as sort of being like speaking for those folks we talked about, like people from Idaho, people from another state, from the red state. Do you feel like either you welcome that, you want to speak for those people, or you feel like the pressure? You're not a spokesman. You're just a playwright.
I think it's just like a ridiculous concept. Like it's like like is Melville speaking for all whalers? I mean, it's just like I think I get frustrated with it sometimes because it's a very thing. It's like a form of criticism that we lob at modern writing. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
It's sort of like, well, what do you like? Well, what are you saying about Idaho? And it's like, I'm not saying anything about Idaho. I created these people from dust. Yeah. And I'm saying something about these people that I've created from dust.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But so no, and I will say the nice thing about writing plays set in Idaho is especially in New York, people don't know anything about Idaho. And so like there would be one thing, it was sort of like I'm writing about like New Orleans or something, and people would be like, yes, I've been to, like they have all these preconceptions of what a New Orleans play should be, Streetcar Named Desire, etc. But with Idaho, it's just people just really have no expectations to either be supported or rejected.
I mean, folks do have preconceptions about that part of the country, right?
It seems like you're fighting against. State. Yeah.
Sure,
but I've also never really written a play. I mean, Greater Clemens is my most overtly political play, and most people who saw that play did not perceive a political dimension to it.
Okay, that's right.
So yeah, I don't know.
The Hobby Lobby play wasn't political at the time.
No, I wrote Hobby Lobby before Hobby Lobby was in the news. I only said, this is a play of mine called A Bride New Boise that I wrote in 2010. That was well before the Supreme Court stuff.
Right.
So I just thought it was a funny name.
Yeah, it is. It's a clever name. Yeah. It's a clever brand name. I also was interested. This is more internal to the play. They're both outsiders in a way within their world, and to make it political specifically, as Keith calls himself, the black queer kid, right? Mm-hmm. That he was rejected because of that. But Ryan, who grew up as it's a bit of a surprise to find out he was so popular because he's so downtrodden when we meet him.
Yeah.
Is this sort of white working class male that we keep hearing about that feels disenfranchised, that feels like they can't get a break, can't keep a job. They're both outsiders in different ways, mm-hmm. right? I just ask you about that aspect of the play, the sense that they're both outsiders. Neither's.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to name a play of mine that isn't ultimately about outsiders. You know what I mean? However you want to define that, like people who kind of like don't fit into whatever like mold they've been asked to fit into.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's probably common to everything I've ever written.
They're all in the wrong place somehow.
Yeah.
I guess the question is always with outside of what? What is what's inside in those worlds, right? What would be inside in Idaho? Right?
I mean, Twin Falls. I mean, I think it would be like the people who are just like they are living middle class lives, supporting their family, going to work.
Right.
Like they're they fit that demographic.
Yes.
That Twin Falls is mostly, these white working class families who would rather just not rock the boat and would just rather live their lives.
I guess, but part of what the dread that sort of runs through this play, and I think there's that moment where Ryan drives the car. He talks about driving. It's kind of this strange monologue where he drives the car out to the middle of nowhere and finds this abandoned shack, and then just thinks, "What if this is the end of the world? And what if nothing ever?"
Yeah.
Is this sense that maybe there isn't inside. There is no normal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously not a new insight, but I feel like because you portray folks on the margins and in their own kind of margins, there is a sense that like that other place. I can't even imagine those people you just described in your plays, right?
Right.
I haven't seen Pocatello. Pocatello said at is it an Olive Garden?
Oh yeah, it doesn't say it, but it's an old.
And is there are there a lot of folks in that? So you just sort of see the average folks. I mean, Hobby Lobby, the Breitner Boise has a lot of different folks at different. They're not all in the middle of an angst crisis.
No, like the manager Pauline
Yeah.
and Paulette, Pauline
So-
in the Hobby Lobby, like just living her best life.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So there is something to contrast. I guess what's striking about this play was that again one of the many things you stripped away from it is those other people. The kids, they're off stage, and we assume the kids are living some version of a decent life.
Yeah.
Right? They're daughters. And I was just curious about that. I also, again, I don't know if this is the kind of thing that occurs to you as a writer, but these things that, this is the kind of things that folks like critics and maybe audiences notice, like these symbols maybe, or resonances. When, so Keith is a early music expert, right?
Yeah.
And there's the bit where they're getting tanked on whiskey and it's late in the night, and they end up in this sort of hilariously maudlin conversation about early music and how there was for a long time just monophony and there weren't two voices together, and this idea and Ryan gets so upset. The person who's never heard this concept before, so upset, like there was a world without harmony. And again, I don't know, you're not putting the thumb too heavy on the meaning there, but it seems like, right? Harmony, two people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I remember like when I first wrote that, I was like, is this too, I think I hopefully got away with it. I'm sure some people don't think I did, but
Right.
but yeah. I mean, but I think like I think what that scene though is really about is not that metaphor. I mean, it's really just about this guy who, because the real tragedy for him is so in the play, this one character is saying that there is this piece of music that was discovered recently, and this is true, by this Italian professor who I actually reached out to because and because I wanted to publish it in the script.
Okay, right.
And he discovered this piece of music that's like from like the 9th century that is the earliest known transcription of harmony, and so he's telling Ryan all about this, and the real thing that Ryan finds tragic is they don't know who wrote it.
Yeah, right. That's
and so really the scene is about like Ryan confronting his impermanence.
Yeah. So it's not just that. Yeah, he talks about how could there be a world without harmony? Oh my God, they don't even know who wrote it.
They don't even know who wrote
Like
it.
the insignificance.
Yeah,
of
this
that.
guy who gave this tremendous gift to the world,
Right.
they don't even know who he is.
So yeah, I mean, again, you talked about how you wrote poetry and then plays appeal to you because you don't have to write these perfect language does not have to be perfect and polished, and yet this play is polished. I mean, it's obviously, and it's not, it doesn't sound slick, but I'm saying, do you save those moments like that line about you share a certain kind of sadness? You have to earn a moment like that, right?
Yeah.
Earn a line like that where it's sort of more on the nose or more something that might be right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first 25 pages of the play are just to try to get to that line.
Okay, right.
Interesting. It's funny. I was so I saw Annie's movie, Janet Planet.
Annie
Baker's new movie.
Annie Baker, yeah.
And it was so lovely, but when I saw the trailer, I got so angry because they just harvested all those lines and put them all together, and I was just sort of like,
all the thesis statement lines.
It took
yeah.
20 minutes to earn that line, but it's a beautiful movie. Everybody should watch it. But
so
yeah,
that would be in the trailer for this if there was a trailer.
Yeah,
Right.
There could be a very bad
Sure,
trailer made.
Kind of sadness.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's funny. No, I don't. So is that a case where one of the things you're driving toward when you talk about is a line like that? Is it some moment of connection?
Yes. Right. Yeah. No, that was a very concrete kind of like destination for me. Yeah. In the beginnings of the play, of just sort of like, which are always like the beginning of starting. The first 20 pages of me are always the most vexing.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's just sort of
Yeah.
the proper, especially these kinds of plays that are like two guys in a cubicle talking about alone.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like that it's a long runway. You know,
Right.
so I think like those first, I would say the first 30 pages I wrote and rewrote over and over and over and over and over and over, and then even in the production with David Cromer, who's the director, he directed the world premiere. We those were the pages we really focused on.
Well, yeah, it seems like that's your exposition essentially.
Yes.
Then how much of it you reel out, how much you feel.
Yeah, and like keeping an audience engaged during what is essentially setup is it's hard. It's hard as a performer, it's hard as a director.
It's interesting though that this is a play again because it's not a plot-heavy play per se, and there's exposition that you don't find out till they're drinking. Till they more backstory. Right. I think we're about ready to take questions if anybody has them. I think someone has a microphone. Is that right? You can talk to us about God, but that's okay.
It's okay.
Maybe someone else has about God. A question, please ask. We can talk more about God in the back, I think, there.
Hi, nice to meet you. You said you were usually driving toward a destination. I was wondering if you took any wrong turns or any turns that surprised you along the way in this play.
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be like a plot spoiler to anybody who hasn't read the play, but about, so in the beginning they're strangers, and they and it's just a guy that, like, I met you at a daycare, I realized you're a loan broker and I am looking for a loan. And in the play, about 40 pages in, the loan broker character, Keith, says, "We went to high school together, Ryan. Of course I remember you. You were a popular kid." You know what I mean? And that was a surprise to me when I got there. And then, of course, I had to go back and like rewrite everything leading up to that moment. But yeah, that was a real kind of like, I had this moment of writing and I was like, wait a minute, this town is not big. Like when they were young, there was only one high school, you know? And I was like, is that interesting that like this one character kind of just deleted this other character from his memory, whereas like he's always lived so large in the other characters, you know what I mean? So things like that. But then you have to do so much reverse engineering, of course, with moments like that. I'm sure there was a couple more, but it's like I always feel like I just try to be as like least precious as possible when I'm writing a first draft, where it's sort of like I'm going to make no judgments about what this play should or shouldn't be, and that I think then that allows you for those moments, you know what I mean? Because if I was sort of like, no, this is what the play is, you know, it's like whenever I teach playwriting, I always find myself telling my students like, loosen your grip, you know, just like let there be oxygen, like you're in a very developmental stage right now. It doesn't have to be good. Like that comes later, you know. I kind of diverted from your question.
But it still ends up being a surprise to the audience when we learn that. But you have to obviously make sure that there's nothing else that's going to contradict that or tip it.
Yeah, because it changes the whole dynamic of the relationship.
Right, exactly.
You know, so and like those moments become very different moments when it's like one character is holding something the other character.
That's right. In other words, yeah. So the mortgage broker Keith knows that Ryan.
Yeah, the entire play is like, I remember
you don't know me,
you,
so there's this. Yeah, there's a wall between. Yeah, okay, I got it. In front here.
Hi, thank you for this evening. So, Sam, you mentioned, you've touched on this a couple times, even just what you just said now. So, you don't write dialogue until later. So, and you don't outline. So, can you say a little bit more about what happens? Or
what's on the
not
page?
so much what's on paper, but what's
I'm on
in your
Chat
head.
GPT.
Yeah. Because it sounds so interesting and so fascinating how you come to the point where you're ready to write the dialogue.
Yeah.
If you can.
You know, I always struggle a little bit when everybody says like, what is your writing process? Because I'm like, I mean, so little of it is actually sitting down and typing. Do you know what I mean? Like honestly, like one of the big ways I usually figure out plays is I go for a jog and I just think about the play. And there's just something about the repetitive motion and also just like raising your adrenaline or whatever that just like helps me kind of like unpack something. But every play is different, and I think the thing that I've realized over the years is the moment I try to like replicate a process from one play to the generative process from one play to the next, it's usually a mistake, because every play wants to come out the way that it comes out. You know what I mean? I mean, there are certain like commonalities, but yeah, they all come out so differently. Like I've written first drafts. Like the first draft of this play, this is probably my shortest play, and the first draft of this play took me over a year to write. Greater Clemens is 3 hours long, and I wrote it in 5 days. I mean, it just like there's never a it always happens differently. You know, it always happens differently. I wish I had a better answer.
You mentioned something. You mentioned something like I remember talking about, was it Greater Clemens where you were, I think the stories you were walking in Chinatown or something. And you had this revelation of like, okay, that's what and it has to be that, and you were like, can I do that? That's really heavy. But was that what it was? You had just
yeah.
Came
I
to
forgot
you.
about that. Yeah, I was walking downtown and I had the idea for the end, which is very bleak. And I remember being like, no,
It just occurred to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because you kind of realize like you're building this machine, and at a certain point, you know, I was pretty far down the line with that play, and I knew what the very end of the play was, but I didn't really know what the mechanism was to get there.
Right.
And then when I had the idea for like a very, very bleak, I think it's the only onstage death I've ever written. I think. But yeah, but then you realize, no, I've been building this machine, and it's kind of working on its own now.
Yeah, it has to do. So, I think you and the yellow there will ready to.
Hi, thank you. Perfect segue into my question because I was going to ask about that very event in Greater Clements. Because by the end of this play, Edmund Donovan's character is almost like enacting this kind of death drive where, like life feels hopeless, their fate feels, and he's pulling everyone into this, like that fate feels immutable. But now with Case and also in Clarkson, you have this same sort of sense of this very, very long continuum of life and death. And, your fate isn't going to necessarily change, but those plays are so much more hopeful and kind of loving. Was there something about writing Greater Clements where you were like, I don't kind of want to go back to that space?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and maybe I will return there again in 5 years I wrote Greater Clements from a place of like, I mean, I said like I feel like it's my only overtly political play. Again, I think most people read it and don't see a political lens at all. But, it's about a town that's voting to unincorporate itself. And so for me, that was just like what I was seeing around me, is like a country bent on its own self-destruction. And so I think like when that's the seed to the play where you're like, okay, this is bent on its own self-destruction and its inevitable self-destruction, even as it thinks it's not, you know what I mean? That I think that like that led me to that moment with Edmund's character. But yeah, I think it was almost just like a boil I needed to lance. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I feel like I'm talking very negatively about that play. I like that play, but it does feel like like something that I just needed to kind of excise, because at the end of the day, I do believe in other people, and I do believe that I am a hopeful person. Now that I'm a dad, I kind of have to be. Like I don't subscribe to the sort of like catastrophism and eschatological terror of our time of just sort of like we're all dying. I don't subscribe to that. But I think that was like the one time I did kind of open the door, and maybe it's a door I don't want to walk through again. To be honest, I don't know.
I mean, having a character. I mean, representation is not endorsement. It's a character. You went there to that place, but it wasn't like you said that's the only place to go.
No, I kind of felt like I just had at least once had to acknowledge that, like, that because one thing I also kind of reject personally is like the hero narrative of like suffering always leading to reward.
Right.
Whereas, like, the shallowest dive in human history reveals that most of the time suffering just sits there and then just falls into the void.
Yes.
And so I kind of just felt like, okay, well, maybe that's an instance of this, you know what I mean? Of one of those people who just like are truly on the losing end of American life.
Yeah, I think the comparison to Ibsen was apt in that case. I mean, at least if you accept that, I don't know if you accept that or not.
A comparison to Ibsen?
Yeah, you welcome that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not quite, it's not quite Ghost, but it feels like in that realm. Sorry. Other questions? No other questions, folks. Ah, back there.
Hi, can you speak to what you've learned about coming at ideas slant or writing the slow burn, which you alluded to kind of with the extended opening of this play where the events maybe aren't so obvious?
Sorry, the question was the difference between.
Or just what you've learned about writing the slow burn or coming at ideas or events kind of slant and letting it speak for itself and not really announcing this is what this is about or this is the event here.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because every play is so in and of itself, so idiosyncratic, you know. But I think it's over the. When I was writing plays in school, like 15 years ago, they were very hell bent on announcing themselves, and very much like I'm a playwright. You know what I mean? Like they just felt so tight and so tight in a bad way, like tight as a drum.
Yeah.
And I think like I've realized over the years that most of the time I do my best work when I don't try to write a good play. And so I don't know if it's ever like a conscious like, oh, this is going to be a really slow burn, but it's more sort of like, oh, this is going to be a play that might not even be a play. And I'm going to like when I started writing this, I was like, I don't know, maybe this is just for me, you know. And I feel like I don't know if this is totally answering your question, but like but I just like I've found that whenever I try to like it's funny because in my work as like a TV and film writer, I do have to think about this stuff of like what's the thing that's going to slam us into the world and like get us on the, you know what I mean? Like it's a very different, you know, it's like a market driven kind of writing. But with plays, I think like whenever I try to, it almost feels like it's a little dishonest to try to hang a play on plot or stakes or, you know, structural gymnastics or something, or at least for me. Like some people can do it really well. But I think that just that belief in my strengths as a writer kind of leads me to a slow burn, I guess. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but.
What's funny, you know, Sam, it just occurred to me, having met you and talked to you a number of times and seen all your plays, it totally makes sense that you're the writer of these plays, right? You seem like the writer of these plays, right? You just feel like, but they don't, none of the characters feel, they feel like they come from you, but none of the characters seem like stand-ins for you, Sam Hunter. Right?
No.
I mean, maybe it's all hidden in there.
Bits and pieces.
Bits and pieces. I mean, every writer always says that, but I don't really feel like, do you feel like you're working things out in your plays in that way? Like, the way some playwrights are like putting myself on, but it's not by putting yourself on the stage in your own struggles.
Not literally, but there is like an auto-fiction element
Okay.
to them. I mean, certainly with this play, but I think like most of my plays, there is some element of like,
Right.
you know, we talked about this play when we were waiting earlier. Like I wrote this play called The Harvest. That,
Yes.
Like I was really me writing about that Christian fundamentalist high school that I went to.
Yeah.
Even though there's many, it's very different from the church that I went to.
Okay.
But
It's
like,
inspired by
but
it.
what I was really like grappling with was like that thing that I felt when I was in that Christian school of just sort of like the world making sense.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, like you see cracks in the veneer, and you're like, wait a minute, maybe
Yeah.
this is, you know.
I just never, when I think about it now, I can't look at a play and go, oh, that's the same character in this play. You know?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not watching closely enough. Maybe,
No, I don't. I think
no.
that's valid.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't mean to.
We've got time for one more question.
Yeah, go for it. There we go. Leslie on the front here.
Hi, thank you so much for chatting. I found it really cool how you're talking about the poetry and how poetry has influenced your writing and kind of was the start of your playwriting journey instead of acting. And I was curious in terms of your writing process now and in terms of and what you're writing now. Mediums are a blurry line, but do you still find yourself writing poetry and finding writing poetry as the characters, as impetus for plays, writing poetry about the plays, about the world of the plays? Do you still, where does poetry fit into your writing now?
You know, I'm kind of ashamed to say it, but I haven't written a poem in, how old am I? I'm 43. I was probably 20 years ago that I wrote a poem. You know, it's weird. It feels like a muscle that atrophied after a while. Not that I was ever a good poet. I wasn't. I mean, they were crappy, but I did have this like ability. Like when I was 17, I just reams of poetry. You know what I mean? Like, angsty teenage poetry all over the place. And like, I don't think I could do that now. I think that's kind of been supplanted by dialogue, in ways that I'm sure like has deeply informed it. But yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, like, I just remember, I feel like one of my like origins as a writer was I was in that Christian fundamentalist school, and the teacher read selections from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland out loud in order to make fun of it, to say like it's godless.
Oh,
And so everybody was just giggling throughout the entire thing, but I'm 15-year-old me, I was just like, what is this? And I immediately sought it out and I read it over and over and over. I didn't understand a syllable of it, but there was just some, you know what I mean? Like, there was just something about it that I was like, whatever this mystery is, I'm totally intoxicated by it. And I think there's something maybe there that like exists in my plays where I'm just like, I like that sense of not aimlessness, but like mystery or something. You know what I mean? Like language-based mystery is sort of like, why did he phrase it like, I think we share a specific kind of sadness? That's weird.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it does feel like something like, it's almost like I used to play piano a ton too, and it's like that's a muscle that's atrophied too, and like, you know. Yeah.
You put it into plays. You know, I don't know if you know the writer Joy Gergely. She once said that playwrights are poets who got lonely. And
That's right.
So thanks for making
That's
our world richer with your plays, Sam.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you so much, and thank all of you. It's such a really awesome, engaged audience. So the plays are over at the bookstore if you want to grab one, and just come back in here. I'm going to bring them around, and Sam will sign your books. Thanks so much for coming.